Hello, I'm Montse Alvarado, and this is EWTN News in Depth.
Catholic schools, how a core strength of our church community is faring during the pandemic. We take a deep dive.
I think that we can learn that faith matters. If we didn't know that before, we know that now.
The head of the National Catholic Education Association goes on the record. Will the filibuster survive? What it could mean for Catholic priorities if the Senate eliminates or bypasses a norm in place for more than 100 years. And one of the world's most renowned singers shares his journey of faith with us. EWTN News in Depth is next.
Welcome to EWTN News in Depth. A little more than 1 year ago, the pandemic hit our country and our schools. It's had a far-reaching impact on education, family life, and how parents have had to adjust. As this school year draws to a close, we take a look at one of the strengths of Catholic life, the Catholic school system. How has it fared? And what is the road ahead as parents make plans for their children next fall? Here's reporter Mark Irons.
The coronavirus has disrupted all areas of life, including inside the classroom.
The teachers have been so welcoming to our kids and the fellow students as well. It's made such a difference.
After their children's public school stopped offering in-person classes, FJ and Allison Huber decided to put their 3 girls in St. Luke's Catholic School in McLean, Virginia.
The school was really clear about what the procedures were and what the protocols were going to be.
The National Catholic Educational Association reports more than 90% of Catholic schools were teaching their students in person this year, unlike many public school districts which offered virtual-only classes.
Hi, how are we doing?
The principal of St. Luke, Tanya Saluski, says the school made it a priority to take the necessary precautions to keep the school doors open in the fall after going virtual last spring.
And when I posed that to my faculty, every single one of them said 100%. Let's figure it out. Let's get these kids back in school, figure out how to be safe.
According to recent data from the National Catholic Educational Association, parents are transferring their kids to Catholic schools for a number of reasons, including the safe learning environment and the emphasis on strong character development. Dr. Joseph Vorbach, the superintendent of Catholic schools in the Diocese of Arlington, Virginia, says even though the pandemic provides challenges, the formation of children is at stake.
Certainly the focus on the whole child in body and soul, I think is, inspires the vocation of a lot of our educators.
Overall numbers in nationwide Catholic schools did take a hit this year. The National Catholic Educational Association says enrollment was down 6.4% for the 2020-2021 school year, the biggest percentage drop in enrollment since 1973. But there does seem to be a silver lining. It looks as though the students transferring to Catholic schools since the pandemic may want to stay. An NCEA survey shows 86% of parents said their child had positive academic, faith, and social experiences at the school, and the majority of parents are planning to re-enroll their students in the fall of 2021. Meanwhile, public schools may be seeing the need to go back to in-person learning.
My priority right now is to safely reopen as many schools as possible, as quickly as possible.
In March, the Secretary of Education, Miguel Cardona, said $122 billion from President Biden's COVID relief bill are being used for that purpose. And the Department of Health and Human Services is providing an additional $10 billion in aid. Catholic bishops have long fought for school choice, public education funds that follow students to the schools that best fit their needs.
We have the best track record for lifting kids out of poverty and giving them a chance to succeed.
But Bishop Michael Barber, the chairman for Catholic Education with the U.S. Conference of Catholic Bishops, says without financial resources for families, low-income parents can't give their children the benefit of a Catholic education. And with the National Catholic Educational Association reporting more than 200 Catholic schools permanently shut down during the pandemic, the need to support Catholic education is dire.
Catholic schools are an essential part of the Catholic faith. They're an essential part of a Catholic parish because they intentionally and intensively hand on the Catholic faith to the next generation.
Mark Irons, EWTN News in Depth.
EWTN News in Depth turned to a person who has had a major influence on the success or failure of Catholic schools in America. We asked her what's on the horizon. Kathy Mears, head of the National Catholic Education Association, is on the record. Kathy, thank you so much for joining us on the show today in between conferences and all the many things that you have going on. I want to talk about Catholic schools. In a USA Today article last month, Catholic school principals were dubbed heroes for their work developing protocol to safely bring kids back to in-person learning. What are the big lessons we can learn from the pandemic?
I think that we can learn that faith matters. If we didn't know that before, we know that now. Our schools went back with science and faith, and they said, we're going to do this in the safest way possible to help our students have in-person instruction if possible, and it worked. I also think we learned that when the church teaches that parents are the first and primary educators of their children, we mean that. And I think parents found that out as never before. You can't just say, oh, it's a school thing, especially when we were doing online last spring and everybody was learning from home. We needed parent support. We needed that partnership between parents and teachers, and we got it. And finally, I think we learned that the principle of subsidiarity that Catholic social teaching espouses is good. It's good for the church. It's good for students. Decisions are best made locally. When our teachers and principals have all the facts, they can make the best decisions for their students. And I might also say that parents did a lot too. They supported our teachers. They provided cleaning supplies. Again, it was a true partnership. And this partnership of home and school really worked well for the benefit of our students.
The partnership definitely was critical this year. The last year, although, has presented conflicting narratives on the state of Catholic schools in the U.S. Some say the pandemic has been hard on Catholic schools with closures, but others say that it's been great for enrollment since they're open for in-person learning while public schools are not. Which one is it?
It's both. And I know that sounds contradictory, but it truly is not. NCEA collects the data every year for the bishops. That's part of our deal. It's something the bishops asked us to do more than 50 years ago, and NCEA has been doing it. But we collect, it's a one-day snapshot. And this year, the date was September 17th. So how many students are enrolled on September 17th, the third Friday of September? That's when we collect the data. And we compared it to last year's data, and we were definitely down. The good news is we've collected more data since then, and we're back up 1.6%. So we are rebounding. The other great thing that we know through a study of about 1,400 parents, so it's not the world, but it's a fair number, 1,400 parents who had enrolled their children in Catholic schools for the first time, they told us, 90% of them told us that we'll be back next year. We love the Catholic school. We had no idea. The pandemic gave us an opportunity to try the Catholic school, and we love it, and we're coming back. So we have those 2 points that paint the picture of the future, the opportunities that we have. And I also think that we have to acknowledge that some of our schools didn't make it to reopening because of the pandemic. When parents lose jobs and can't afford tuition, when parishes can't afford to subsidize the school because donations are down because they haven't had mass, all those things did impact us.
Right. In Cleveland, the voucher program allowed many parents who were being forced to miss work or cut back on hours to accompany their child's virtual reading or to place their child in Catholic schools for in-person learning. So the voucher program gave them that possibility. Is that the case anywhere else in the U.S.?
It's really hard to say because Catholic school universe is big. So when you talk about Cleveland, that's correct. And we know other Catholic schools across the country enjoyed that kind of a bounce because of voucher programs. We had schools in Florida that experienced the same things. We also had some schools in Indiana who again saw an uptick in enrollment because once parents figured out that the Catholic schools were going to be open for in-person and maybe the public schools were not, then they sought the vouchers that they hadn't ever sought before, or they were able to remain in schools because of the vouchers.
They're
definitely helpful.
That's true. There was a great Supreme Court decision last year, the Espinoza decision, that did open up these possibilities for partnership. Are these kind of innovative partnerships and voucher programs something that you're going to be looking for to open up choices and offer parents different options?
Yes, and more states are looking at these kinds of options for their families. I know West Virginia recently passed legislation that would create more opportunities for vouchers and tax credits. Indiana is looking to expand their program. So yes, we are definitely, Catholic schools work with Catholic conferences across the country in support of these programs. And these programs are game changers. They make a difference. And again, the number of states continues to increase. Over half our states now have programs. I think it's like 27, 28 states have programs, and the number grows every year.
Cardinal Dolan and Archbishop Gomez were on the show last month, and they described Catholic schools as critical to the future of the church and as the best that we offer communities as Catholics, a commitment to forming hearts in the faith, but also giving children the best education possible, that high quality of learning. Are you worried about government policies that might contradict those values or put pressure on schools to adopt curriculum or beliefs that go against church teaching on abortion or human sexuality?
Yes, some days I really do worry about that, and I wonder what will happen if that comes to pass. I think that we can go by the history, however. Do we want to look at ways that parents can retain their control over the curriculums of schools? And I think you can ask anybody in the country and they would say, yes, we want parents to be in control of the curriculums that their children are being taught and that are being used. So I think that as long as we remember that parents are in control, and again, that's not, while it's an official teaching of the Catholic Church, most public school parents agree too. They need to have input into the curriculum their children are being taught, public schools included, charter schools included. The other thing I just want to point out, Archbishop Gomez, Cardinal Dolan, I have been very fortunate this year to meet with about 75% of the bishops in this country, and they all say that. They all say that our schools, our teachers have been heroic, that they have done excellent work, and that they are the future of the church. We know that children who attend Catholic school, when they're 40, they're much more likely to be in the pews than those who do not attend Catholic schools. So we need to reach out and make sure that we provide quality Catholic education to as many people as possible. And we're grateful for the bishop's support and are very glad that they publicly announce their support for Catholic schools.
Kathy, I'm curious about the new Education Secretary, Miguel Cardona, who is Catholic and says that he has memories of being on an altar boy and that his faith has animated his service. Is there a partnership there, a possibility? He's not a union guy, which a lot of people have said is a good thing. What do you see there as a potential for partnership?
I think that he wants to partner. I think that he really cares about children, and I think those are the things that we need in a Secretary of Education. I think it's difficult. The unions are very powerful, and you know, the unions have one job. Their job is to protect their workers, in this case, teachers. But I also understand that I think most people in this country want children to be placed first. And unions can't do it because that's not their job. I'm hopeful that he will understand that we are contributing to the common good. And the United States is better because we have Catholic schools. I've yet to meet the person that says, oh, we would be better without Catholic schools. I haven't met that person. So I think that it's really important that we try to find the common ground and see how we can work together with him for the benefit of children, because at the end of the day, that's what matters and that's what we're supposed to be doing.
Kathy, a quick last question just about minority students and at-risk students, food security. Are those issues that you were worried about as you were in the middle of getting back to in-person instruction? Did that drive that need to get those schools open again?
Partly, yes. I mean, it is very important. The other thing I would say, though, is last spring during the pandemic, our schools made sure our students receive that food. Even though the schools were closed, many of our schools were sites where food was were used for food distribution. Food insecurity is real. We really believe that for most children, in-person instruction is the best. There are some children who cannot do it for various reasons, and we understand that. But for most children, if we're going to have the kind of education that Pope Paul VI described as education, he said, was an intimate communication between souls. If we're going to have that intimate communication, it is very helpful to be face-to-face, in person, and we can take better care of the students because we can see how they're doing.
Kathy, we're grateful for the work of Catholic schools for sure, and we'll be following this issue closely, especially as graduations approach and plans are made for the fall. Thank you again, and a very happy Easter to you.
Thank you, and I really appreciate you having me. Happy Easter.
We continue the conversation about the importance and strength of Catholic education with our expert panel up next.
Sull'arno d'argento si specchia il firmamento.
And later, Andrea Bocelli shares more than just his voice. What inspired him to start his famous foundation. EWTN News in Depth will be right back.
Welcome back to EWTN News in Depth. I'm Montse Alvarado. Catholic schools have been a bedrock of the American education system for decades, investing in many communities where there were no opportunities to learn and grow. While the number of Catholic schools is not as high as it was in the 1950s, there are today nearly 6,000 Catholic schools across the United States, with more than 1.6 million students enrolled. Here to talk about the impact of Catholic schools in the U.S. are Ashley McGuire, a senior fellow at the Catholic Association, the Superintendent of Catholic Schools for the Archdiocese of Boston, Thomas Carroll, and EWTN's D.C. Bureau Chief and Executive Editor, Dr. Matthew Bunson. Thank you all for taking part in this discussion. Matthew, where does the tradition of teaching come from for Catholics? Why do we have schools? I know for the Jewish community, opening their schools during COVID was more important than even opening up their synagogues. Are Catholics the same?
Well, for the Catholics, it was a bit of both. We recognize the importance of having our churches open, but we also recognize the importance of our schools. The church is a profound teacher, and throughout history, the church has been in the forefront of education, from the cathedral schools to the great universities. And the success story of education, of Catholic education in the history of the United States is one that I think is often overlooked. We had a profound effect on American life and culture, and we still do. But we also see the importance of having those schools, of having our children formed intellectually, but also spiritually.
Children definitely needed their schools open. Ashley, what was the most obvious disparity in the way that private and public schools handled reopening?
Well, I think it really sort of showed how much control the teachers' unions have over things, because private schools fought really hard to open. In a lot of places, including where I live, the government tried to close them down. And I think there was definitely a sense that unions were pushing for that, because it would have highlighted the fact that schools actually could open safely if they took just basic common sense measures. And it's really, I think, to the credit of Catholic schools that so many private schools did open, because they led the way. Catholic schools didn't hesitate for 1 minute. They pushed forward and they said, we can do this safely. We want to do this because they disproportionately serve communities that have been really hard hit by the pandemic. And I think it was actually Catholic schools that sort of paved the path for other non-parochial private schools to follow in their path. But you're absolutely right that what ended up happening highlighted the disparity in education in this country, and the fact that private schools were really advocating for their students, whereas public schools were sort of beholden to the teachers' unions, who were basically doing anything they could to keep schools closed. And many of them still are closed in the country.
They are. Tom, you're one of those examples of plowing forward to open up your schools. You were recently on our network discussing your new project, Lumen Verum Academy. What motivated your desire to open this new school?
Well, first of all, we did open right away all of our schools, all of the diocesan schools, and we had a tremendous success with it. And now we have really a tremendous sense of optimism now that the pandemic is starting to clear out. So now we're turning to try to do new innovative things. And there was a court decision in the U.S. Supreme Court, as you know, that the Beckett Fund for Religious Liberty won, Our Lady of Guadalupe, in that case made clear that schools that are affiliated with religious organizations have a wide berth in terms of selecting who represents the faith. And so as a result, we're now in the wake of that decision, that close decision, we are opening a school that's targeted at families that are very concerned about preserving the faith of their children. Often in elementary schools, I joke, children believe whatever their mom tells them about faith. But as they enter 6th and 7th grade, and certainly in high school, they start asking a lot of questions, as they should. And we want to make sure when they start asking those questions that they're surrounded by teachers who are all devout Catholic teachers. And so that decision enabled us to take that stand, and we're very excited about opening this school.
That is exciting, Tom, and we hope that you'll talk to us more about it in the coming months. Ashley, as a mom of 4 with 3 in private school, you wrote multiple articles on the issue of school shutdowns last year. You talked about the Catholic Church's fight for educational equality. How has the pandemic raised the stakes?
Well, I think it's important to remember that so many of the social institutions in this country were forged by the Catholic Church in times of crisis, whether it's our current hospital system. And I think that our sort of private educational system, we have the Catholic Church to thank for that. And I think this pandemic showed that, yet again, when there's a crisis, the church always moves bravely into the void. And as a mom of 3 kids and now an infant, I was so incredibly grateful because, just seeing my kids out of school for a couple of months, you see how much children need to be in school. They need to be with their friends. They need to be with their teachers. They need to be in that structured environment. And my heart just sort of broke thinking about so many of the American kids who aren't in good environments. I mean, we read endless news stories about, the rise in domestic violence cases and child abuse. And so, I think it just really shone a spotlight on how much Catholic schools really do care about their pupils, that they were willing to sort of courageously take the risks that were required. And as Tom pointed out, they did so with tremendous success. I mean, my kid's school has been open the entire year without a single case of COVID on campus. And I know that that's the case for so many other schools. And so, I think what the pandemic did was remind people of how courageous Catholic schools are and just what a wonderful service they've been to the children who have the benefit of attending them.
Tom, let's talk about those social issues that Ashley raised. In the interview with Kathy Mears, the interim president of the NCEA, we just scraped the surface of the issue of food security and the underreported domestic abuse that we saw. How did your school system address those issues?
Yeah, so in our case, when we decided to open, one of the reasons we did is because concerns about those and many other issues when we were forced to be remote in the spring. And so there are a lot of negatives about being remote when everybody's remote. Food security is one of the issues, but there also is a rise in abuse and domestic issues and so forth. And so we also, the other factor is a religious factor, which is that religious formation is an in-person activity. It's all about having an encounter with children and other adults, and that can only be done well in person. And so we had both the constellation of social issues and a religious reason. The other thing driving our decision to play off what Ashley had indicated is there was a big difference in how we looked at it. We believe with all of our soul that each individual, each child is created in the image and likeness of God. And if you believe that, you cannot strand our children. And so as soon as we got the green light to open schools in Massachusetts, the different sectors reacted differently. So on the public school side, they said time for a conversation, time for a negotiation, time to figure out what we want to do. On the Catholic side, because we believe they were created in the image and likeness of God, we viewed the second we had the authority to go forward, we knew we were going to open. We didn't have to make a decision. We just had to figure out the logistics of how we did it safely. And we found that even though we got a lot of criticism when we opened all our schools, people thought we were going to become super spreaders and all that kind of stuff.
You did.
But it turned out in the end that the safest place for a child in America was inside a Catholic school that was following health protocols. And that has informed the conversation. And after that record built week after week, month after month, the CDC, the American Academy of Pediatrics, and others came on board. And a lot of governors realized that when we showed the way, ironically, the Catholic Church leading the way on science, we were the ones following science. The other team was basically making their decisions based on superstition.
You were
But when we
pioneers.
showed a safe record, that affected what other people did all across the country.
Yes, you were pioneers around the country. Matthew, we have a new head of the Department of Education, and school board elections are coming up around the country. What big controversial issues will we be addressing?
Well, for Catholics, some of the biggest ones obviously are the reopenings, how we reopen in the face of COVID. We're also looking at curricula, the polarization being caused by a pretty radical agenda on human sexuality and the transgender movement. All of those issues are going to be playing into the school board elections and the discussions of education for years to come.
Thank you so much, Matthew, and thank you, Ashley and Tom, for sharing your perspectives with us. A look at some of the top headlines of the week coming up.
We do not want to turn the Senate into a miniature House of Representatives.
And a tug of war on Capitol Hill as legislators debate the filibuster, what a rule change could mean for issues key to the Catholic faith.
The death of Britain's Prince Philip, husband of Queen Elizabeth II, tops the week in review. In a statement from the royal family early Friday morning, Philip died peacefully at Windsor Castle. The Duke of Edinburgh spent a month in the hospital earlier this year before being released on March 16th. Prince Philip was known for setting a new course for the monarchy, helping to bring the royals to life on television, promoting environmental causes as well as science and technology. Married to Queen Elizabeth II for 73 years, he was the Queen's confidant and advisor and the longest-serving consort of any British monarch. Prince Philip was 99 years old. By the end of this week, 20% of the U.S. population will be fully vaccinated against the coronavirus, with more than 3 million vaccinations being administered a day. But the Centers for Disease Control warns a more contagious UK variant is fueling an uptick of new cases and hospital admissions in concentrated parts of the U.S. With much of the older population getting their vaccines, many of those in the ICUs now are people in their 30s and 40s.
It's almost a race between getting people vaccinating and this surge that seems to want to increase and do what's going on, for example, in Europe, where they're having some surges now that are really quite alarming.
The Biden administration has announced vaccinations are expected to be open to all adults by April 19th. There's been a massive surge in coronavirus cases in Brazil, as daily deaths from COVID-19 have reached more than 4,000 a day for the first time. Only the U.S. and Peru have had daily death tolls that high. Brazilian President Jair Bolsonaro says there will be no national shutdowns. Some governors and mayors are reopening parts of the economy despite overcrowded hospitals and a collapsed health system in several regions. One of the largest cemeteries in Latin America, in Sao Paulo, is struggling to find enough space to bury bodies. Powerful testimony in the second week of former Minneapolis police officer Derek Chauvin's murder trial. The prosecution says George Floyd died when his oxygen was cut off by Chauvin's police restraint while he was arresting Floyd. The defense contends Floyd had a long history of drug abuse that contributed to cardiac arrest. This week, a series of medical experts took the stand. Using charts and marked up photos of the scene, the medical experts explained why Floyd couldn't breathe in his prone handcuffed position. The medical testimony followed days of police officer testimony about Chauvin's use of force. Witness after witness said the force was excessive, including Chauvin's former boss, the Minneapolis police chief.
That in no way, shape, or form is anything that is by policy, is not part of our training, and it is certainly not part of our ethics or our values.
The chief fired Chauvin and 3 other officers hours after Floyd's death. Chauvin's lawyers will present their defense next. George Floyd's passing has sparked civil unrest, international protests, and debate about police brutality. The Christian group InterVarsity Christian Fellowship has won a federal religious discrimination lawsuit against Wayne State University in Detroit. InterVarsity is active on more than 600 college campuses in the U.S. in 2017. Wayne State said InterVarsity's requirement to have Christian leaders violated the school's non-discrimination policy. However, a federal judge ruled this week that Wayne State violated the First Amendment in kicking the group off campus. The students were given a symbolic $1 in damages. It's been almost 2 years since fire devastated Notre Dame Cathedral in Paris. More than $1 billion have been raised to help restore Notre Dame since its famed spire came crashing down on April 15, 2019. On this second anniversary, new video shows how work crews have reinforced the massive vaulted ceiling with wooden pillars. Work to begin rebuilding that ceiling and the famous spire is expected to begin later this year. Controversial Catholic theologian Hans Küng died this week in Germany at the age of 93. He was one of the youngest theological experts advising bishops at the Second Vatican Council in the early 1960s. A Catholic priest, he later became one of the loudest critics of Popes John Paul II and Benedict XVI, challenging church doctrine over several decades in multiple best-selling books. Küng argued the church was resistant to reform and lacked transparency. He disagreed with church teaching on contraception and believed the Pope was not infallible. The Vatican eventually censored him, although he was never dismissed as a priest. The oldest living recipient of the Medal of Honor, World War II veteran Charles Coolidge, has died at the age of 99. In 1944, as the senior enlisted soldier, the 23-year-old Army sergeant refused to surrender during a firefight with the Germans in eastern France, even though his unit was outnumbered 4-1. Facing annihilation by German troops with tanks, Coolidge's rifle and machine gun unit was able to hold a critical hill for 4 days, allowing Allied forces behind him to regroup. He received the U.S. military's highest decoration for valor, the Medal of Honor, the following summer in 1945. With his death, there remains just one living medal recipient from World War II. In his first push for more gun control, President Joe Biden announced executive actions Thursday to tighten regulations. He outlined 3 tasks for the Department of Justice, including tightening regulations on pistol stabilizing braces, which help a shooter fire weapons with one hand, writing model legislation for red flag laws that allow people to petition police to confiscate guns from a person deemed dangerous, and limiting ghost guns, which don't have traceable serial numbers and don't require background checks. U.S. Attorney General Merrick Garland supports the actions.
Currently, individuals can buy kits that contain all or almost all of the parts they need to assemble a gun. Because of a gap in the ATF regulations, these kits may not be considered firearms.
Republicans have been quick to criticize the executive actions, calling the move an infringement on Second Amendment rights. At the southern U.S. border, the U.S. government picked up nearly 19,000 children traveling alone in March. It's the largest number ever recorded, according to the U.S. Customs and Border Protection. That comes as images have emerged of dangerously packed migrant facilities. The surge has coincided with the Biden administration's decision to roll back Trump-era policies, which forced migrants to stay in Mexico for their hearings and expelled unaccompanied children without giving them opportunity to seek asylum. A decision by the Senate parliamentarian this week will allow the slim Democratic majority to bypass the legislative filibuster on certain bills. The decision comes as a tug-of-war continues on Capitol Hill over whether the filibuster will be eliminated entirely. But what is the filibuster, and how would removing it impact issues important to Catholics like abortion and religious freedom? Kate Scanlon reports.
Now, for the first time, really, the legislative filibuster comes under threat of termination, where legislation could pass the Senate without any need whatsoever to conciliate views from the minority and get a supermajority for support.
In an evenly divided Senate, a procedure within the upper chamber is coming under new scrutiny. According to the Congressional Research Service, the legislative filibuster is a Senate procedure that includes any obstructive tactics to block a measure by preventing it from coming to a vote. In order to end debate on a bill, 60 senators must agree to proceed to a vote. A Democratic majority dependent on Vice President Kamala Harris's tie-breaking vote often cannot meet this threshold. The Senate parliamentarian decided this week that the budget reconciliation process could be reopened later this year, allowing the majority to bypass the filibuster on some of its agenda. Eliminating the filibuster would allow any legislation that went through the Senate to pass on a 51-vote majority, including bills like the Equality Act and the For the People Act, or legislation concerning issues like religious liberty, conscience protections, or abortion.
Both on the right political spectrum as well as the left political spectrum, there's a lot of frustration that they don't see their priorities getting through. I'm in the pro-life movement. We certainly feel that.
Supporters of the filibuster say the procedure gives a minority party the opportunity to have a voice in legislation, preventing majority rule. Opponents say the filibuster can paralyze legislative action in a divisive political climate, and a simple majority should be used instead. Democratic Senator Alex Padilla of California, who recently replaced Harris in the Senate, tweeted last week that in order to accomplish some of the president's legislative priorities, quote, "We must end the filibuster." At his first formal press conference as president last month, Joe Biden said he had an open mind on the filibuster.
We're going to get a lot done. And if we have to, if there's complete lockdown and chaos as a consequence of the filibuster, then we'll have to go beyond what I'm talking about.
But Biden was not always open to eliminating the filibuster. Republican Senator Ben Sasse of Nebraska recently read a speech on the Senate floor then Senator Biden gave in defense of the procedure in 2005.
I've been in the Senate for a long time, and there are plenty of times I would have loved to have changed this rule or that rule to pass a bill or to get a nominee confirmed that I felt strongly about, but I didn't. And it was understood that the option of doing so just wasn't on the table.
Attorney Martin Gold frequently advises senators and their staffs on congressional rules. He says polarization sometimes makes it difficult to reach across the aisle, causing some to question the filibuster itself.
One's attitude about the filibuster should not be based solely on who is doing the filibustering.
But it isn't just Democratic priorities that have failed under the filibuster. The Born Alive Abortion Survivors Protection Act, legislation that would have protected infants who survived botched abortions, received the support of a bipartisan majority in 2019, but failed to overcome the filibuster. Tom McCluskey, president of March for Life Action, said the pro-life movement should support the filibuster because it would protect pro-life legislation from changes based on who is in power.
By removing the filibuster, all we're doing, we're not making permanent law. We're only making law until the other party takes office.
While there are growing calls from many Democrats to eliminate the filibuster, Democratic Senators Kyrsten Sinema of Arizona and Joe Manchin of West Virginia say they support it, which will leave it in place for now. From the Capitol, Kate Scanlon, EWTN News in depth.
More on what eliminating the filibuster could mean for Catholic priorities. Our roundtable discussion is next.
Andrea Bocelli's faith journey ahead.
Amazing grace, how sweet the sound that saved a wretch like me.
Welcome back to EWTN News in Depth. There's growing concern over the push to end the filibuster. The implications of this move could allow many bills to pass with just 51 votes. Vice President Kamala Harris could easily be the tie-breaking vote for Democrat-backed issues. Here to break it all down for us today are three guests. Amanda Mackey, a lawyer and a 2020 congressional candidate in Florida. DJ Jordan, the former communications director for U.S. Senator James Lankford and currently the vice president of the Pinkston Group. And once again, Dr. Matthew Bunson, EWTN Bureau Chief and Executive Editor. Thank you so much for joining us. Matthew, give us some background on the once-a-year opportunity of reconciliation and the Byrd Rule.
Well, as you say, it's a once-a-year opportunity. In other words, as the House and Senate formulate their budgets, they instruct committees to look into the impact of those budgets. That leads to a process that's called reconciliation. And what that is intended to do is to sort of circumvent legislatively in a process the requirements for the 60-vote majority in the U.S. Senate. You have a similar thing in the House of Representatives, but the way it's structured is not quite as important. So this is a means, technically, to overcome the potential filibuster. The Byrd Rule applies here, and that's important, too. You go all the way back to the 1980s when it was first imposed. That is intended to sort of weed out extraneous legislation that doesn't actually pertain to the budget and also places limits on the debt and, of course, potential impact on Social Security.
With that context, Amanda, over the past 4 days, we've seen Senator Manchin publicly oppose in the Washington Post getting rid of the filibuster following the lead of Senator Sinema from Arizona, who made her stance in the Wall Street Journal. What does this mean for President Biden's $2 trillion infrastructure plan?
it means that he's going to have a very difficult time passing this through the United States Senate, but I think he was going to have a hard time passing it through the U.S. House. Look, there are Democrats who are saying the infrastructure, and I say, quote, infrastructure, because there are so many ancillary, extraneous things in there that don't pertain to infrastructure, like roads and bridges and highways. But you have Democrats that say this should be a $10 trillion package. They're more progressive. You have moderate Democrats that say this should be pared down. We just spent $2 trillion on a COVID relief bill. That's on top of spending over $4 trillion on COVID relief since last March. These are real dollars that taxpayers are going to have to account for. And people want to know why Congress is pushing these massive bills. And Democrats, just because they have a slim majority in the single digits in the House and a 50-50 split Senate, that they would be pushing this. They're not going to be able to do this without the filibuster. But more importantly, it's not just this bill. And there are so many things the Democrats have pent up frustration over the last 4 years, not having control. They want to push through, especially the voting law that they're looking to enact that would mandate mail-in voting, that would mandate ballot harvesting, and change the dynamics of elections for years to come in favor of the Democrats.
DJ, used by both Democrats and Republicans, budget reconciliation has given us changes to the Affordable Care Act, and it gave us the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act. It's hardly used only for budgetary matters, just like Matthew talked about. What can we expect, even with Senator Manchin's warning that relaxing budget reconciliation norms would give us new and dangerous precedent that would be set to pass sweeping partisan legislation that changes the direction of our nation every time there's a change in political control?
Yeah, you can just go down the list of a few pieces of legislation that would pass simply by simple majority, and I don't think that would be good. And I don't think the American people want that. You can talk about the Green New Deal. You can talk about Medicare for all. You can talk about the Equality Act. One topic of debate this week is the Hyde Amendment. The stimulus bill did not have the Hyde Amendment in there to protect against federal funding and taxpayer funding of abortion. So that's a big problem. While I appreciate Senator Sinema and Senator Manchin coming out in support of the filibuster and against these types of reforms that are being discussed, if you live in West Virginia, if you live in Arizona, make sure that your voice is heard, to make sure to keep up the pressure to keep them on that position. I've seen too many politicians flip-flop on this, including our current president, Joe Biden, including our Vice President, Kamala Harris, senators like Cory Booker. They all have flip-flopped. They all were staunch supporters of the filibuster until they had an opportunity to pass their own agenda with a simple majority, and I think that's wrong. The American people want both parties to work together, and we should demand that of our Congress.
Amanda, you mentioned H.R. 1 and DJ just mentioned the Equality Act. The proposed election integrity and voter access law is H.R. 1. Are these two major pieces of legislation that seem unlikely to pass without aggressive moves like changing the Senate rules what concern you the most? What are the most concerning parts of these two pieces of legislation?
Well, I think really, making it illegal to check IDs. Look, the most recent polling shows that 75% of Americans agree that we should have voter ID checks. There's absolutely nothing wrong. When you go to a baseball game or you go to a concert, you have to show ID to pick up your tickets, don't you? You have to basically show your ID for every facet of your life. Sometimes I even get asked for ID using my credit card alone. So what is so harmful in wanting to have safe and secure elections? I think that is really important. And, if you look at the polling that was done just on what happened in November, whether you agree with, who's in office now and who isn't, that's irrelevant. But 75% of Republicans believe that we need to have free and fair elections, and we didn't in November. And 40% of independents who really determine the outcome of our elections. So it is important that we get this right. And what the Democrats are doing is they're trying to make the taxpayers be on the hook for campaign contributions to a candidate you may not want to give a single campaign contribution to. It may be morally objectionable for you to do that. But I think the voter ID piece is the most egregious. in addition to the mail-in balloting, requiring all 50 states to do that, and ballot harvesting. For your audience, those of you who may not know what ballot harvesting is, it's when a third party can go door to door, apartment to apartment, and collect ballots. Now, what happens if that ballot comes from a house with a Trump flag in front of it, or a Biden flag in front of it for that matter? Then you could see that maybe the chain of command would go down, the chain of custody would go down on where those ballots actually end up. It's a very scary proposition.
That's right, Amanda. DJ, let's get your take on that. Former President Barack Obama called the filibuster a relic of Jim Crow. Was that an accurate description?
Look, I'm starting to learn about this whole cancel culture thing, and I don't know if it works that way, if politicians can just cancel former statements that they said, but former President Obama said this as senator in 2005. If the majority chooses to end the filibuster, if they choose to change the rules and put an end to the democratic debate, then the fighting and the bitterness and the gridlock will only get worse. The list goes on and on of a lot of politicians who have defended the filibuster at one time because they actually heard from their constituents that they want people in Congress to work together. And many of them have flip-flopped, and I think that's very, very unfortunate. It's also very unfortunate that race is being infused into this. I think race is being used as a political weapon way too much in our polarized culture right now. I've heard Elizabeth Warren called it a relic of Jim Crow. That couldn't be further from the truth. The filibuster started in the 1830s, nearly 40 years before Jim Crow even began. The filibuster is used to protect the rights of the minority, and it's unfortunate to hear these Democrats not caring about the rights of the minority in Congress.
Matthew, why should this be of great concern to Catholics? Bring us home, bearing in mind that the Church teaches many things about the role of government.
Well, Catholic social teaching reminds us that the government has an important role to play. One of the fears from a Catholic social teaching standpoint is that doing away with the filibuster could, in fact, lead to an overreach on the part of government. We're already talking about bills in this conversation, such as the Equality Act, that is a massive overreach. We've also seen discussion of fears of abortion, of transgender agendas being advanced. So there is much to fear from a Catholic social teaching standpoint, and a need to rely on the government's use of the filibuster for everyone's rights.
Thank you all for your input. We'll be watching this closely. And for more from EWTN News in Depth, we invite you to connect with us on our Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram pages. Andrea Bocelli is up next.
And we take you to the Divine Mercy Shrine in Poland as we celebrate the gift of God's mercy this weekend.
You may know his voice and you may recognize his face, but you may not know his Catholic story. World-famous opera tenor Andrea Bocelli is sharing his faith journey in depth with us. He spoke to EWTN Vatican Bureau reporter Colin Flynn.
He is known across the world for his golden voice. But as well as having a passion for music, Andrea Bocelli has always had a passion for his Catholic faith and has even performed for 3 popes at the Vatican. And in the city of Florence, I sit down with Andrea and his wife Veronica. I know that you are a man of strong faith. You have a strong Catholic faith. How important is your religion to you?
Per me, diciamo che è una ragione di vita.
For me, I can say it is a reason for life. Because life, even if it lasts 100 years, is so insignificant when you compare it to eternity. If life didn't exist, an eternal life, life after life, then everything would lose all meaning. So my faith comes from extremely simple reasoning. I do not believe in the clock without the clockmaker. I don't think anything can be achieved without someone who has designed and built it. Therefore, I have faith. I have a lot of faith in the one who made the world.
I read once a quote from you. You said, "Everyone has a destiny, but destiny is God." What did you mean by that?
Nel senso che
whoever puts his life in the hands of the one who created it, who wants him, desires and loves him, puts their life in good hands.
Si specchia il firmamento, mentre un sospiro e un canto si perde lontano.
And it's this strong faith that led him to establish the Andrea Bocelli Foundation in 2011. This charity aims to empower the poor and those in need all over the world with a focus on educational projects.
When we started almost 10 years ago, I mean, this year is going to be the 10-year celebration, which is a big number from a certain point of view, a very small one on the other. So I want to believe that whatever we've been able to achieve during the past years is just a kickoff of what we can do in the future.
Diciamo che io se è vero, senz'altro è vero.
It is absolutely true that to whom much is given, much is asked. I cannot imagine what will be asked of me when I find myself face to face with the one who made the world, because so much has been given to me. I've had a life of rich possibilities, of experiences, so much received, and so there is so much I should try to give.
Molto dovrei provare a dare.
When you look back at your amazing life so far and your illustrious career, what are you most proud of?
L'affetto che sono riuscito.
The way that I have been able to capture people's hearts, for me, this is really the most important thing.
Any regrets?
Regrets? No. Regrets, no. Maybe some things I would have done differently, but regrets? No.
In Florence, Italy, Colm Flynn, EWTN News, In Depth.
We thank Andrea Bocelli for giving so much of himself to a cause that helps so many others. And that does it for this edition of EWTN News In Depth. I'm Montse Alvarado. We invite you to join us again, same time next week, as we continue the conversation about important issues impacting our Catholic community. And one last thing before we go. As we celebrate the second Sunday of Easter, the EWTN Poland team shares footage from a significant destination in Europe for Catholic pilgrims. We honor St. Faustina, the Polish nun whose visions of our Lord Jesus Christ inspired Divine Mercy Sunday. Enjoy this visit to Krakow's Shrine of Divine Mercy in our Images of the Week.